Welcome back to another episode of 10-Minute Mood. This conversation is more like 15 minutes, and it's taken from a longer 30-minute conversation, which is available in full on our website. This episode looks at the psychology of unhealthy and healthy exercise mindsets and behaviors. And the next episode is a continuation where we look at very practical skills, strategies, and questions you can ask yourself to assess what your exercise mindset is like and how to try to keep on top of having a healthier relationship to exercise so that it can work in service of your values, your needs, and your overall well-being. And so if you find this episode interesting, you'll likely enjoy the very next episode, and you can find the entire conversation all together in one place on our website, sydneycitypsychology.com.au. Enjoy. So thanks for joining me today, Veena. We thought it might be interesting to talk a little around the topic of exercise. What does it look like when exercise is going well and it's in support of a healthy life? And what might it look like when it starts to go off the rails?
The reason why I thought this would be, helpful to talk about is because there's all sorts of assumptions and notions and ideas that exist out there about exercise and how it's good for you and how it's healthy and how it can help you achieve your weight loss goals or help you look a certain way in terms of body shape, appearance. And actually, if we're not careful, this common kind of misconception that all exercise is healthy is actually a misconception because it can be unhealthy depending on how we exercise. And don't get me wrong, we are all encouraged to, move our bodies and keep ourselves just fit and healthy and strong and flexible, mainly because in the context of like quality of life and longevity and physical health complications, that can be very helpful. And there are recommendations that exist around and guidelines around how much we should aim to move our bodies and engage in physical activity each week. But when we think about exercise, people sometimes conceptualize that as the only way that you can move. And actually, if we think about physical activity coming in very many different forms, you can incidentally move your body, like, walk to the train or clean your house, those kinds of things. So exercise is only one way of moving your body. So it's what we'd consider structured or planned physical activity, like going to the gym, swimming, jogging, those kinds of things. But I'm not sure if you're familiar with what might unhealthy sort of exercise look like.
And I'm really curious to hear what you have to say on that, because I agree with you. There is this notion out there that, exercise is the answer to almost everything, but what are the limits on that? And so I am curious to hear, what unhealthy exercise would look like. What would
Yeah.
be some of the things to look out for?
Yeah. Actually, the Center of Clinical Interventions, they have a very good sort of definition in that they actually say exercise is unhealthy if it's compromising rather than supporting well-being, if it's rigid, inflexible, punitive, or associated with feelings of guilt, and if it's sort of primarily motivated by the goal of weight loss rather than health. So if we think about what that might translate into is that sometimes people might notice that their exercising becomes more solitary. It's not actually done with enjoyment, with other people in social kind of groups. And it's fine if you prefer to exercise by yourself. But if over time you're noticing it's becoming less enjoyable, perhaps you're going in spite of having injury or illness or pain. Sometimes we wake up and we're exhausted and we're not in a state to perhaps exercise or move our bodies in the ways that we want to as rigorously as we want to. But often when people exercise unhealthily, they go in spite of all of this. So they're ignoring cues that their body is sending them about any changes that they might need to make to be flexible in order to move their bodies that particular day. And also, if we're thinking about the weight loss kind of aspect of it, that some people kind of start to exercise as a way to lose weight, but then they continue to exercise, even if their weight loss has been quite significant or to an unhealthy level, or it progresses into something like an eating disorder or some other kind of significant health problem.
Yeah.
And if the motivation to exercise is actually for weight loss, more so than it is for fitness or enjoyment, that's one indicator. Sometimes people experience huge amounts of guilt if they're not allowed to exercise for whatever reason, or if their doctor has said, look, you might have to lay off this for a couple of weeks or so. And some people actually demonstrate some withdrawal symptoms like irritability, feeling anxious, angry, depressed when they're not actually able to exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, those are really good points. When you were talking about not paying attention to body cues like pain and
Yeah.
thinking you're just going to push through, I see that in people when they talk a lot about over relying on this idea of using their mind to override their body. So, obviously, in something like a performance sport context, there might be room for that. But when that
Yeah.
becomes, like you say, the primary way that people are taking part in exercise,
Mm,
I think that would be a real clue as well to just trying to use your mind to push through something. It
yeah.
actually puts you in opposition with your body.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think it's difficult because when we start to think about what we want to achieve and how we want to do that, and exercise becomes a way to do that, like you're saying, the mind can actually start to override. Well, let me just ignore this niggle that I have over here, and let me just ignore that I haven't had an opportunity to hydrate myself or eat consistently today, but instead I'll just go and push myself to run. And those kinds of ways of exercising can lead to ongoing or more significant problems down the track.
Yeah. And it's like the opposite of more of a compassionate stance towards yourself as well. But at
Mm,
least I liked the word flexible versus rigid that you were talking about. You know, the definition involves unhealthy exercise as being something where exercising becomes rigid.
mm,
Uh, because again, like all of these things we're talking about, there would obviously be places where it's okay to do in small measure or for particular purposes.
mm,
But when it becomes, yeah, the set way that I exercise always, and if I have to deviate, if something happens
yes.
that requires me to deviate, I find that difficult. Like you say,
Mm,
either feelings of guilt or perhaps even being in distress or trying to really push through it anyway in
mhm.
opposition of your body or the advice of others. In terms of questions that someone might ask themselves that might help them to reflect on their relationship to exercise, you know,
Mhm.
where does it sit? Is it healthy? Is it starting to border on unhealthy? Do you have any advice around that?
Yeah, look, there are some questions you could ask yourself. You might ask yourself if you're ever adjusting the amount of exercise that you do according to what you've eaten, for instance. If you have a tendency to overeat, binge eat, emotionally eat, or even if you're eating consistently regularly throughout the day, but perhaps you've eaten a little bit more than usual, whether you just kind of how much you exercise based on that, and whether you worry that you're going to gain weight if you don't exercise. If again, that weight loss or maintaining kind of weight is the focus, because some people actually believe that their weight should stay stable, and technically weight kind of fluctuates and it sits within a range. So if you're sort of like, oh, I need to be X amount of weight and I'm going to, if it's gone up, then I need to exercise, and that becomes quite problematic. Calorie counting is another way. And sometimes people actually won't eat until they've exercised.
Oh, wow.
There's some quite rigid sort of rules around, I can't eat unless I've exercised. And that
Yeah.
might be in a little bit more kind of extreme cases, but it can happen.
Mm.
And it can be used as a punishment for eating certain foods or types of foods, eating too much. And if we're thinking even about like appearance, are you actually exercising primarily because you want to change your appearance in some ways?
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and if we're thinking about emotions, are you exercising because you're trying to get rid of certain feelings like anxiety or guilt? Or perhaps it's become a way where you've learned how to manage stress or anxiety through primarily exercising, and that might be the only way
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
cope with those emotions.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
so
comes
there's
back to that. It comes back to that using exercise as a primary vehicle
Mhm.
for doing these things again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to it being a tool in a toolkit. Because of course,
Mhm.
exercise can have some effect on things like stress and anxiety and
Mm.
mood, right? But it would
Mm.
never be yeah, I guess it should never be used as the only mechanism.
Exactly.
Mm.
And it's part of, if you think about how you wanna live your life, some the work that I do with people who present with eating disorders,
Mhm.
the different areas of their lives become quite constricted in that the focus is mainly on eating and exercising, right?
Yeah.
Or it's in relation to kind of body weight, shape, appearance, and they're missing out on these other kind of aspects in their lives that they might actually find meaningful, like, social engagement. And sometimes people, for instance, won't go to a social thing because they haven't had a chance to exercise, right? That's, we're talking a bit more extreme, but again, it can happen. Some people might feel the need to go exercise twice a day. They might be at the gym twice. Initially, exercise might have started as a way to help them feel good in some ways, improve their mood, which it can do. But perhaps over time, it's become like a reinforcer and they keep going, they go for longer, or it gets linked in with other things like, oh, I need to look a certain way, so I need to eat a certain way, so I need to go X amount of times.
Yeah, I think you can see this quite a lot too. And you can understand why. With people who lose a significant amount of weight, and if they're doing that through starting to engage with exercise, I think even the comments that they get from other people about noticing their weight loss and all the sort of positive reinforcement that they might get socially about their weight loss can turn into, yeah, I guess this reinforcing loop around my identity and my worth in the eyes of others is tied up in my weight. And so, an anxiety and a fear around ever letting that slip. Now I have to either maintain this or just better and better and better. And I can see then how that would go hand in hand with using exercise in a punishing fashion too. Should there ever be a change in their weight again, then they return to it with more of a punishing attitude. And then that social restriction component. Yeah. So much of this, Veena, sounds like the relationship that a person sets up with their body through exercise is like the mediator, and getting clearer, I guess, for a healthy exercising point of view, getting clearer on the idea that exercise can have a particular purpose and we use it in a particular way. However, it is one part of a much fuller life, and it's actually a means to a larger end. So for healthy exercise, what would that look like in your mind?
Yeah. In that sense, trying to get, because the way that we might exercise changes over time, depending on, if I think about how I was exercising, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago versus now, or even just moving my body, it does change over time. So there's got to be a flexibility and a consideration of, within kind of everything else that I have going on in my life, how might this work for me? And even just thinking about what could be enjoyable or pleasurable for me. If I were even to get in like 20 minutes of movement today, like what would I really like to do? Can I incorporate this with other people? Can I, before and even after and during, can I actually pay attention to what it feels like for me to be exercising? When do I know that I've pushed my limits, so to speak, if I've chosen a particular way to exercise? And if I'm exercising at a higher intensity, am I actually giving myself time to recover and trying to rest? And also nutrition becomes a part of that as well. Am I actually fueling my body for the level of like activity that I'm doing?
When you work with someone, Veena, in your mind, how are you conceptualizing what the point of healthy exercise is, if that makes sense? Why is it that it's important for people to be moving their bodies? How are you conceptualizing it?
Yeah. I always like to know, what is it that people value about movement and about physical activity? And that might be cardiovascular health is important to me. I want to maintain that because that's something that I would like to see happen across the span of my life. Okay, great. So that's something that then you can work with, how are you achieving that?
I see.
Whereas if somebody says to me, I'm exercising twice a day and I barely have any rest days and I feel like I need to exercise because I need to keep up with this, I need to be fit, I need to be fast, then I'm wondering, like, what's the function of that? Because if you're exercising twice a day, that to me sounds a bit more like driven exercise or quite compulsive kind of exercise. Like, I need to go, I should go, like I have to go. I'm going to feel guilty if I don't go. I'm going to feel anxious if I don't go. And then if we look at what is the function of that, is that because you feel the need to do exercise to manage your moods, to manage how you feel, to maybe feel better about yourself or feel more confident in some ways?
Yeah. So getting really clear on the function of this is important. My mind goes to a few clients I've had over the years where, and I can definitely relate, where they have children. So they have young children and they realize, oh, I can't even keep up with my kids. And that becomes, that's the function of, well, I need to then work on my movement, my exercise, and build up my strength. And I just think that to me sounds like a really healthy relationship to something like exercise, because the purpose is something that's meaningful
Exactly.
outside of how I look, how my body looks. Yeah.
Yeah.
In
And a lot of
service of
people,
something that matters to you. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And a lot of people do want to, as they age, in particular, want to play with their kids or their grandkids, or they want to be able to go on hikes or do the things that they might enjoy in nature or outdoors, right? Those kinds of things are important. And if we can understand, okay, that's what we're working towards, that's what's important to you, then we can look at, like, how can physical activity be a part of that?
Yeah.
But often what I find is like the reverse occurs, where people come in and they say, I want to lose weight, and I know that exercising kind of burns calories, but I'm not exercising enough.
Right.
And then there's all sorts of loops that are going on there, because then the way they start to view exercise is something that they should be doing. It doesn't, they haven't connected with, why might this be something that I want to do or might be pleasurable or enjoyable for me to do?
Yes. What is it going to help? What other things will it help me to do outside of
Exactly.
looking a certain way or feeling a certain way about
Yeah.
myself? I think that feeling about myself, which
Mm.
is oftentimes intimately linked with how other people then speak to you and tell you you look, right? That is also part of that unhealthy loop. That's what I see as well. And yeah, definitely.
So the main thing is to think about, what do you actually get out of exercising?
That's it.
What does it do for you?
Mm.
And if there are indicators there of like unhealthy exercising, the question would be like, what are you afraid may happen if you stop exercising?
Yeah. Mm. That's a really good question. I imagine too, for a lot of people, the answer to that question would be like a loss of control,
Yeah.
their sense that they can be in control.
Mm.
And I think oftentimes it's a being in control of how we view ourselves and feel about ourselves, this
Mm.
idea, and then being in control of how we're perceived by others.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you would like to hear Veena and I discuss some very practical questions and strategies for assessing your exercise mindset, then listen to episode 16, where this conversation is continued. Or you can find it all together in one place in one audio file on our website, sydneycitypsychology.com.au. And as always, please reach out to a health professional if you have any further questions in this area. If you think that seeing a clinical psychologist could be useful to you, then please do get in touch with us. All our contact details are also on our website. We would love to hear from you.